was a baker. And as a direct result of that, I have become a philologist, a lover of words. Too many words if you listen to my kids. Anyways, a lover of words. It seems totally illogical, I guess, to go from baker to philologist. But you see, my earliest memories are being perched up high on his counter, watching him all covered in flour. He'd be directing his army of assistants and apprentices. He would give me these bits of dough to play with. And being the typical cute, spoiled brat that I was, I always got first dibs on what came out of his oven. It's a miracle I'm not fatter than I actually am. Anyways, when I was 4 years old, I was brought to Canada, where my mother was in medical school. And so I was taken care of by a rather kindly, elderly next-door neighbor who, one fine day, opens a bag and she hands me this square of white pasty stuff and says, bread. Well, I figured this was dough like what my grandfather used to give me, so I started to play with it. I was going to make this really cute little bunny from it. Whereupon the good lady unleashes a torrent of English indignation, of which I understood not one blessed word. I learned rather early on that language barriers can sometimes be convenient. Anyways, later on that night, my parents explained to me that one does not play with food, and that bread in our native Swiss German was Brot. Well, my 4-year-old brain froze in horror because there is no way that white pasty stuff in any way resembled what my opa created in his bakery back in Basel. And since that time, I've been fascinated by words, by origins, by etymologies, by language, translation, communication, by how it is that the meaning of a word can morph ever so strangely when it passes from language to language, or how when you put words together to form an expression, sometimes the meaning of the expression doesn't quite equal the sum of its parts. Take free trade, for example, or my kids' favorite, Microsoft Works. Or Western civilization. Now, before you brace yourselves for an onslaught of West bashing, that's not where I'm going, that's not what I'm about. We have eradicated smallpox, we have walked on the moon. We are free. We are free to disagree with each other. We are free to disagree with those who are in power, with those whom we have collectively voted to place in those positions of power. We increasingly acknowledge that we have done wrong in the past, and we are increasingly willing to acknowledge that we must do more for this planet. Therefore, we are civilized. It's the Western part that gets to me. I mean, okay, it is geographically accurate in the Western Hemisphere and all that, but is it historically valid? Let's take a look at some of the cornerstones of Western civilization. For example, time. We are ruled by time. Like poor Alice in Wonderland's rabbit, we're always late for that very important date. We have our routines, deadlines, due dates, schedules. We are watching the clock as anxiously as the rabbit with those 24 hours, those 60 seconds, 60 minutes. Who came up with that 24, 60? Why not 10? We have 10 fingers. But not even the French Revolution could make decimal time stick. Anyways, we have the ancient Sumerians to blame for our very odd units of time. They were a remarkable civilization who lived in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. Over 5,000 years ago, they devised the world's first writing system that we have deciphered, and also a rather curious system of calculation that was hexagesimal, a rather bewitching word for being base 60. Hence, our 2 times 12-hour days, our 60 minutes, our 60 seconds, and for that matter, our 360-degree circles. And then there's the alphabet. It's really a remarkably easy form of writing, and I apologize to anybody who's still suffering from nightmares from grade 1. Seriously, learning 24 symbols is a lot easier than the hundreds, if not thousands, that Chinese entails. Our alphabet came into existence almost 4,000 years ago when Africa met Asia, when ancient Egyptian scribes found that they couldn't use their standard hieroglyphic system in order to write down the names of their Semitic workers in the Sinai Peninsula. And so they had to isolate a subset of these hieroglyphs and use them to write the names, to transpose the names phonetically of their Semitic workers. One of those Semites must have noticed what was going on, must have been some brilliant bilingual genius, because he or she took that system and from it developed the world's first alphabet. One sound, one symbol, one symbol, one sound, and every single alphabet on this planet has been either directly derived from or inspired by this original alphabet. And then what we write on, paper. It is becoming increasingly easy to envisage a world without paper in our cybernetic age, no question about it. But we have to admit that civilization is really built on mountains and mountains and mountains of paperwork. Paper, amazing stuff, light, easy to transport, relatively inexpensive, easy to manufacture. Yes, everybody knows that it was the Chinese who invented paper some 2,000 years ago. It was brought west by the Arabs. We also have the Arabs to thank for our delightfully elegant, simple, and very practical number system. We still call it Arabic numerals in their honor. The Arabs themselves, however, adopted the concept from even farther east, from their eastern neighbors, the Indians. And if you are not convinced that the Arabic numeral system is truly remarkable, think of what our world would be like if we were still stuck with Roman numerals. Now there's an economic nightmare. Anyways, I'm sure you're all getting the point right now. Africa, Asia, Egypt, India, China. And some of you must be saying, what about the Greeks? What about those amazing Greeks, those very Western Greeks, those very European Greeks? Those Greeks who were the first to be dissatisfied with supernatural explanations of things. Those Greeks who were the first to grow up and stop blaming Mummy and Daddy God for everything. Those Greeks who realized that if they woke up in the morning with a bellyache, it wasn't some high-heeled demon dancing in their gut. It was the fact that they had overindulged at the symposium the night before. And yes, the Greeks were the first to realize that natural phenomena could be systematically investigated and rationally explained by human intelligence. And this indeed is the foundation of our science, of our technology, no question. But how did they get there? The Greeks themselves admitted freely their incredible debt to Egyptian science, to Babylonian mathematics and astronomy, to Indian philosophy, yes, Indian philosophy, and to, of course, the Phoenician writing system. And the Greeks who first came up with these tremendous innovations in human thinking were Ionian Greeks. This means that they didn't live in Europe, but in Asia Minor, where they were in close contact with the previous, more sophisticated Eastern civilizations. And then the other question is, how did the Greek heritage get to us? Well, we're Westerners, they're Westerners, straight line, it's a no-brainer. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. Fortunately, it was considerably more complex. About 1,600 years ago, just after the Christians assumed control of the Roman Empire, it began to fall apart. Because of the barbarian invasions, the Christians were busy struggling for their existence, and they had no time or patience or tolerance for this pagan learning. Greek scholars had to flee east. They fled to the Persian Empire, where they were welcomed and encouraged to continue their studies. As a matter of fact, it was under the extremely tolerant Persians, ancestors of today's Iranians, that the Jews were able to compile one of their most important religious texts, the Babylonian Talmud. And then Muslims conquered the western, eastern, and southern shores of the Mediterranean and beyond to Persia and northern India. And they encountered schools and scholars, libraries filled with texts, hundreds and hundreds of incredible texts. Enlightened, tolerant Muslim rulers dedicated substantial resources to seeing to it that these texts were translated into Arabic, made accessible in Arabic. With the support and encouragement of these tolerant Muslim rulers, teams of scholars of many faiths, of many origins, gathered together in a massive translation enterprise and hunted down every bit of philosophical and scientific information that they could find in Sanskrit, in Persian, in Syriac, in Coptic, especially in Greek. They translated it all into Arabic. And once it was in Arabic, scholars compared the results of Indian and Persian and Greek mathematics and medicine and astronomy. They found errors, they found inconsistencies, they compiled, they contrasted, they corrected, they did further research, further original research, they challenged, they started to express doubts about some of this earlier information. And with the help and support of the Muslim rulers, with their financial support, these scholars brought human knowledge to incredible new heights. As a matter of fact, while Westerners tried to heal their sick through exorcism, physicians under Muslim patronage operated on cataracts. They performed surgery under anesthetic. They described infectious diseases. They described the complications of diabetes. They worked in hospitals with specialized wards. They treated depressed patients with counseling. They recommended a balanced diet and stress reduction. Bet you thought stress was new. And when Western sailors were terrified of sailing west because they were going to fall off the edge of the world, geographers under Muslim patronage calculated the circumference of the world accurately. And while Westerners were terrified of every eclipse, astronomers under Muslim patronage predicted eclipses accurately. And while Westerners were busy counting on their 10 fingers, mathematicians under Muslim patronage developed the Arabic numeral system, developed decimal fractions, developed the whole trigonometric system with all trigonometric functions, developed algebra with its systematic algorithms for solving quadratic and higher equations. And while Westerners superstitiously believed every word there, let's face it, often uneducated priests fed them, Jewish and Muslim theologians studied Greek philosophy and found ways of applying it to their respective religions and were able to reconcile faith with reason. Among these last, I have to mention Moshe ben Maimon, who is better known as Maimonides, one of the greatest Jewish minds ever to grace this wonderful planet. At night, he wrote his thousands of pages of fabulous philosophy, but he had a day job. His day job was being personal physician to Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt. So you have one of the greatest Jewish philosophers who is a personal friend, confidant, and physician to one of the greatest Muslim leaders. And then in the 11th and 12th centuries, Christians began to conquer Muslim lands in the Levant, in Spain and Sicily. They in turn came across schools and scholars and libraries with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of incredible Arabic texts. Enlightened churchmen and again tolerant Christian rulers dedicated resources, supported, encouraged teams of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish translators to work together to make this material accessible to Europeans. It was an incredible amount of science, of philosophy that was being transferred, that now flooded into Western Europe. And as a result, Western European geniuses, such as St. Thomas Aquinas, was inspired to read the works of his Muslim and his Jewish counterparts and apply their theories. He, in turn, was able to reconcile faith and reason. With this influx of information based on Muslim sources, universities started to be built in Western Europe. They had ready-made texts. These translations from Arabic served as standard textbooks in optics, in pharmacology, in medicine, in mathematics, geometry, geography, you name it. In fact, for example, Avicenna or Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine served as the standard medical textbook in Western European medical schools for close to 500 years after it was translated from Arabic. It took Western physicians 500 years to surpass what Avicenna discovered. Anyways, with this tremendous influx of information from the Muslim world, Western Europeans learned to challenge, to think, to question. Western European theologians, scholars, philosophers, scientists were motivated to push the limits of theological expression, to push the limits of scientific knowledge farther and farther and farther with their research, with their investigations, with their experiments. And then the Reformation, and then the age of scientific revolution, and then Copernicus, and then Galileo, Newton, Leibniz, and then the mind-broadening time of the Enlightenment, and then the tremendous innovations of the Industrial Revolution, and then the modern age. And we haven't looked back. We have conquered smallpox, we have walked on the moon, and we haven't looked back. We haven't looked back. Now there's a problem. They say that those who are ignorant of the past are prisoners of the present. And we are all painfully aware of how polarized our present has become. Us, them, east, west. We should look back. We should look back and understand that we really don't have a right. We really shouldn't call this Western civilization. It's too polarizing. It excludes the historical reality of our global origins. We should look back. We should look back and honor those enlightened and tolerant Muslim and Christian rulers who supported and encouraged teams of scholars of many faiths, of many origins, to work together to bring human knowledge to greater and greater heights. We should look back. We must look back and let yesterday's examples of tolerance and cooperation inspire us to build a more tolerant, a more cooperative, and a more peaceful tomorrow. Thank you.